In the Southeastern Conference, it just means more media days. 4 of them, in fact, in Dallas, Texas this week to kick off a new year of SEC football. On day number 1, it was LSU, South Carolina, Ole Miss, and Vandy at the podium. Today, on day number 2, one of the newcomers makes their debut at SEC Media Days. That would be Oklahoma, with Texas following on a Wednesday afternoon. Georgia, Tennessee, and Missouri also at the mic. I'm sure we will hear a lot of Kirby Smart getting grilled, and rightfully so, for all of the dangerous and reckless driving arrests and run-ins with the law in Athens, Georgia, out of his Bulldogs team. A lot to get to today at SEC Media Days on day number 2 in Dallas. But we start with this. 4 media days for the SEC. Donnie Rightside has to love that.
Yeah, exactly. And also, what are we doing on SEC Media Day in Dallas? Now, I understand that you're adding, the University of Texas there, so you want that Texas footprint right away. But I did hear a pretty funny thing that all of a sudden said, hey, I know we're opening up today, but get this. We're going to be in Atlanta next year, back where the SEC belongs, for our Media Day, and away we go, which I do. But like, when you talk about the SEC, the heart of the SEC technically is Atlanta. It's where they play the SEC championship, easy to get to for most of the schools. But understand why they're going to Texas, sort of that olive branch to say, you know what? Flagship program in this state is Texas. Let's honor them by coming over to the SEC, and rightfully so. But this is the media market that is basically the closest to professional sports, where the beat writers come in flocks as opposed to just a few scatterings and questions. We love the SEC because typically the rivalries are already there. The one thing that is a shame is we no longer have Nick Saban as a coach at SEC Media Day, as opposed to now being in the media, where I think he left his credential and they didn't let him in. Picture that too, right? Nick Saban shows up to media. They usually just whisk through because he has, 15 guards with Alabama. You know who he is. Nobody's checking his ID. But now he's just rolling up there in a nice suit trying to get in. Sir, I don't know who you are at this point. I'm Nick Saban. Who was Nick Saban? I used to coach Alabama. You don't coach him now. You got to go back to your room and get your credential and come back in. So that was pretty funny from yesterday. But I guess that's the biggest part. No longer Saban at SEC Media Day. And I did like when he would have a feud with some of the actual reporters and or other coaches in the SEC. I do miss that.
Nick Saban, a journalist just like Donnie Rightside and myself, did not have his credential, maybe did not know he needed his credential at SEC Media Days for the 18th consecutive year, but for the first time in the last 17 as a media member and not the head coach of the Alabama Crimson Tide. Kalen DeBoer, the new head man in Tuscaloosa, on the stage tomorrow at SEC Media Days. Of course, Nick Saban will be a feature of ESPN's College Game Day this year, the second best college football pregame show in this country, only behind, of course, College Football Today. But Nick Saban also doing work this week with the SEC Network. I love Nick, but we got to tighten it out just a little bit here, Saban, from one media member to the next. Don't say you question why Texas is getting all of the love in the SEC, expected to contend for a conference crown when they didn't really do anything even in their previous conference. And then when asked what your conference championship game prediction is, have Texas playing Georgia. That's not how it worked, Nick. If you go with one, you cannot say the other, but Nick Saban is not alone in believing that the Longhorns are going to play for an SEC title come that opening Saturday in December in Atlanta, Georgia. Texas has the second best price to win the SEC championship this year at plus 350, only behind those Bulldogs from Athens.
Yeah, it should be. And again, it's a lot different vantage point here in the SEC, where, again, new teams and expansion, we get that. But also the advent of the playoffs expanding from, the mythical national champion to the BCS era 1 and 2 to 4, and now the true expansion that we have now, which is awesome. So when you enter into the season, sometimes it's not always about it's do or die on a week-to-week basis. You now have coaches with like that second life and that second opportunity. How many times in the past was like, hey, LSU is going to travel to Alabama. Well, winner of that game is probably going to win the SEC and goes on to the championship, and the loser, who might only have one loss on the season, doesn't get to play for anything at that point. So I do think it's interesting this year where the SEC takes on that whole, where typically it was like, okay, you're doing yourself damage where maybe a team from the ACC or Big Ten is like, man, that's a cakewalk schedule. They went unbeaten. They're in the national championship round, as opposed to a 2-loss SEC team going like, we played so many tough teams on this season. It's unfair that we had to do this and you get to advance. Now you get the benefit of the doubt. 1 loss, even 2 losses will be able to get you into a national championship picture. So I like that. And I like to see the coaches, how they operate on a day-to-day basis, where so many times, like, you lose second week of the season. Hey, kids, I got to keep you motivated. We're not playing for anything the rest of the year, but let's see if we can win some football games. That's no longer the case, and I really like that.
At the power conference level, of course, no longer divisions in any of the 4 that we have remaining. There are 6 teams around the SEC. Make that 7, in fact, because I believe Tennessee is at, 8.5 for the Volunteers. 6 teams in the SEC with a win total of 9.5 or higher. For the likes of LSU, Alabama, and Missouri, the under has significant juice. But even a 9-3 SEC team will certainly be in the running come November when the CFP rankings are first released for one of those 7 at-large bids to the college football playoff. Ole Miss, one of those teams with a 9.5 win total within the SEC, in the over the slight bit of juice. I bet it yesterday, looking at the Runnin' Rebs schedule this year under Lane Kiffin. I think there is a great path for the Rebels to maybe contend for an SEC crown or at least a spot in the college football playoff. Greg Sankey thinks very highly of himself. He is the SEC commissioner, and he had this to say yesterday. Quote, "We know who we are in the Southeastern Conference. We're the one conference at this level where the name still means something. The southeastern part of the United States, let's not bring up Missouri or Oklahoma, where when we expanded, we actually restored historic rivalries that, if we end off that quote, they had destroyed years prior by poaching Texas A&M from the Big 12 to ruin one of the longest standing rivalries in college football between the Aggies and the Longhorns." But he is correct in the renewal of that historic rivalry, the Lone Star State Showdown, later this season. But the idea that they have kind of had conference realignment work in their way when they were the first people to even start this wave of realignment, adding OU and Texas, is a little bit lost on me.